Stop everything you're doing right now and listen. Because what I'm about to tell you changes everything you thought you knew about why your life went the way it did. You weren't paranoid. You weren't imagining things. You weren't being dramatic or oversensitive. Like they kept telling you every time you questioned what was happening around you, you were right all along. And now I'm going to show you the receipts, the evidence, the blueprint they used to systematically dismantle your confidence, your connections, your entire sense of reality, one calculated move at a time. They picked you. And no, this wasn't random selection. This wasn't coincidence. This wasn't bad luck or wrong place, wrong time. This was deliberate, strategic planning that started long before you even knew their names. You want to know why you were chosen because you had something they needed. Something they couldn't generate on their own. Something that made their empty existence feel temporarily complete when they were feeding off your energy. You were selected, studied, and marked for extraction, like a resource to be mined until there was nothing left but the shell of who you used to be before they got their hands on your trust. Let me paint you the picture of how it really went down while you were living your life thinking everyone operated from the same place of basic human decency. They were taking notes. Every story you shared became ammunition. Every vulnerability you revealed became a pressure point. Every dream you mentioned became something they'd later use to manipulate your emotions. They weren't listening to understand you. They were listening to decode you, to find the exact combination of words and actions that would get you to lower your guard completely and let them past every boundary you'd spent years building. You remember those early conversations, don't you? The ones where they seemed so interested, so understanding, so perfectly aligned with everything you'd been looking for in a connection. That wasn't authenticity, that was reconnaissance. They were building a profile, learning your triggers, your fears, your deepest desires, and they were taking mental notes on exactly how to become the person you trust with everything. They studied you like you were their personal psychology project, and you had no idea you were being observed, analyzed, and categorized for future exploitation. But here's where it gets darker, because they weren't working alone. And this is the part that's going to make your blood run cold when you finally understand the scope of what was happening. There was a whole network involved. People you thought were neutral parties, people you considered friends, people who smiled in your face while reporting back about your movements, your emotional state, your vulnerabilities. They had informants everywhere, gathering intelligence about your life, your patterns, your relationships, and feeding it all back to the main operator who was orchestrating your systematic breakdown. Remember those random people who suddenly showed up in your life right when you were at your most vulnerable? The ones who seemed too good to be true, too perfectly timed, too conveniently helpful. Those weren't accidents. Those were plants, specifically positioned to gather information, to influence your decisions, to guide you toward the outcomes they'd already mapped out. Every new friend who appeared during that time period was vetted and approved by them. Every introduction was calculated. Every social situation was engineered to serve their agenda. They created scenarios designed to test your boundaries, to see how much you tolerate before fighting back, to measure your breaking points. Those weren't organic conflicts, those were manufactured crises designed to wear down your resistance, to exhaust your emotional resources, to make you too tired to question what was really happening. They knew exactly which buttons to push to trigger your trauma responses, and they pushed them strategically when you were already depleted, already struggling, already questioning your own perception of reality. The group chats you weren't invited to, the conversations that stopped when you walked in, the sudden shift in dynamics that you couldn't quite explain but definitely felt. That was the network in action. They were coordinating their approach, sharing intelligence about your emotional state, planning their next moves based on how you responded to the last manipulation. You were living in a carefully controlled environment where every interaction was potentially compromised, and you had no idea you were surrounded by double agents pretending to be genuine connections. The isolation started so gradually you didn't even notice it was happening, until one day you looked around and realized everyone who genuinely cared about you was gone. This wasn't natural social drift. This was engineered separation, designed to remove your support system one person at a time, until you had nobody left to validate your reality except them. They systematically poisoned every relationship that might have protected you from their influence, turning your allies into strangers, or worse, into weapons aimed directly at your stability. They planted seeds of doubt about you in the minds of people who loved you, using half-truths, twisted narratives, and strategically timed revelations to make others question your character. While you were defending yourself against accusations you didn't understand, they were playing the victim, telling everyone how difficult you were, how unstable, how impossible to deal with. They were building a case against you in the court of public opinion long before you even knew you were on trial, and by the time you realized what was happening, the verdict was already decided. Every friend who suddenly became distant, every family member who started treating you differently, every colleague who stopped including you, that was their handiwork. They were behind the scenes, whispering concerns, expressing worry, painting you as someone who needed to be handled carefully, or better yet, avoided entirely. They turned your entire social ecosystem against you while maintaining perfect deniability because they never said anything directly provable. They just planted suggestions and let other people's imaginations do the dirty work. The genius of their isolation protocol was making it look like you were isolating yourself, making it seem like you were the one pushing people away, being difficult, being antisocial. They created situations where you had to choose between compromising your values or losing relationships, and then pointed to your choices as evidence of your dysfunction. They manufactured impossible scenarios where any response you gave would be wrong, and then used your inevitable failure as proof that you were the problem all along. Now let's talk about how they systematically dismantled your trust in your own perception. Because this was their masterpiece, their greatest achievement in psychological warfare. They didn't just lie to you, they created an entire alternative reality where up was down, black was white, and everything you experienced had a completely different explanation than what actually happened. They rewrote history in real time, making you question memories you knew were real, making you doubt experiences that definitely occurred, making you apologize for things they actually did. Remember those conversations where you brought up something they said or did, and they looked at you like you were insane, swearing it never happened, calling you crazy, paranoid, delusional? That wasn't forgetfulness. That was deliberate erasure, designed to make you question your own memory, your own sanity, your own grip on reality. They kept you constantly off balance, never knowing what was real, what was imagined, what was yours to own, and what was projected onto you by their careful manipulation. They'd do something cruel, and then act confused when you reacted like you were being dramatic about nothing, like you were creating problems where none existed. They'd make promises and then deny ever making them, agree to things and then claim you misunderstood, start fights and then accuse you of being confrontational. Every interaction became a maze where the walls kept moving and the exit kept disappearing just when you thought you'd found it, leaving you exhausted, confused, and increasingly dependent on them to tell you what was real. The documentation, you started keeping the screenshots, the recordings, the proof. You began collecting because you needed to verify your own reality. That's when you knew something was deeply wrong. Normal relationships don't require evidence. Normal connections don't make you question your sanity. Normal people don't systematically dismantle your confidence in your own perceptions. But by the time you realized this, they'd already convinced everyone around you that you were unstable. So even your proof looked like paranoia to outside observers. Once they had you isolated, confused, and doubting everything, including yourself, that's when the real extraction began. And this is where you need to understand exactly what they were after. It wasn't just your energy, your time, your resources, though they took all of those too. It was something much more valuable, something much harder to replace. They were after your essence, your light, your unique frequency that made you who you are, and they were determined to either possess it or destroy it because they couldn't stand that you had something they'd never be able to generate themselves. They fed off your emotional responses like parasites, getting stronger every time they triggered you into fear, anger, sadness, or desperate attempts to fix things. Your pain was their power source. Your confusion was their camouflage. Your attempts to understand and help them were their entertainment. They created crisis after crisis just to watch you scramble to solve problems they'd manufactured, just to feed off the energy you expelled, trying to restore balance to deliberately destabilize situations. Every talent you had, they either claimed as their discovery or diminished as worthless. Every achievement you accomplished, they either took credit for or explained away as luck. They systematically devalued everything that made you special, while simultaneously extracting those exact qualities for their own use. They studied your methods, your thought processes, your creative approaches, and then presented them as their own insights, while convincing you that you had nothing original to offer. The exhaustion you felt wasn't natural fatigue. It was depletion from being constantly drained by an energy vampire who knew exactly how to tap into your reserves. They kept you in a constant state of emotional dysregulation because that's when you were easiest to feed from, when your defenses were down, when your boundaries were compromised, when you were too tired to protect your own energetic field battery for their empty existence. And every time you tried to recharge, they'd create another crisis to drain you again. But they weren't satisfied with just taking from you privately. They needed to destroy your public image too, because leaving you with any form of social capital was too dangerous. The smear campaign started while you were still trying to figure out what was happening, while you were still believing their lies about wanting to work things out, while you were still protecting their reputation even as they were systematically destroying yours. They were 10 steps ahead, painting you as the villain, in a story where you were actually the victim. They told everyone a version of events where they were the long-suffering saint, and you were the unstable problem they'd tried so hard to help. They shared selective screenshots that made you look bad while hiding the context that explained your reactions. They told stories about your behavior while omitting what they did to provoke it. They painted themselves as the victim of your dysfunction while actively creating that dysfunction through calculated psychological torture. The narrative was set before you even knew there was a story being told. The flying monkeys. They recruited the people who started treating you differently based on things they'd heard. The sudden shift in how others perceived you, that was all orchestrated. They identified people who were easily influenced, those with their own issues with you, those who enjoyed drama. And they fed these people exactly what they needed to hear to turn them into weapons against you. They created an army of proxies to continue the abuse even after they'd stepped back, making it look like everyone independently came to the same conclusions about you. Your attempts to defend yourself only made you look worse because they'd already primed everyone to see your defense as attacks, your truth-telling as lies, your evidence as manipulation. They created a framework where anything you said or did would confirm the narrative they'd already established, where your silence was admission of guilt and your speech was proof of instability. They trapped you in a public relations nightmare where there was no winning move except to completely disengage. Which is exactly what they wanted. Every time you started to heal, every time you began to piece together what really happened, every time you took a step toward recovery, they appeared with perfect timing to destabilize you again. This wasn't coincidence. This was surveillance. They were monitoring your progress, tracking your healing, watching for signs that you were getting stronger, and intervening just when you were about to break free from their influence. They couldn't let you heal because your recovery was a threat to the narrative they built about you being the problem. Those random messages that came just when you were starting to feel better, those accidental encounters that happened right when you were moving forward, those mutual friends who suddenly reached out with updates about them exactly when you'd stopped thinking about them, none of that was organic. It was all calculated to pull you back into the cycle, to reopen wounds that were starting to close, to remind you that they still had access to your life even when you thought you'd cut them off. They used your empathy against you, sending signals of distress right when they sensed you were detaching, knowing you'd been programmed to respond to their pain. They played victim to mutual friends, knowing it would get back to you, knowing it would trigger your need to correct the record, or worse, your desire to help them. Despite everything they'd done, every manipulation tactic was designed to keep you engaged, to prevent you from achieving the indifference that would finally free you from their control. The hoovering attempts, the sudden apologies that came months later, the acknowledgement of wrongdoing that seemed so genuine, that wasn't real change. It was strategic re-engagement. They studied recovery resources to learn the language of accountability without actually doing the work. They mimicked personal growth to create the illusion of change. They performed redemption, just convincingly enough to create doubt about whether they'd really been as bad as you remembered. The aspect. They reconfronted the doubt. To remove release. It was all designed to keep you trapped in cycles of hope and disappointment. Now here's the part that's going to really mess with your head. Because this whole time you were trying to understand their behavior through the lens of normal human motivation. But that was your mistake. They weren't operating from the same emotional framework as you. They weren't seeking connection, healing, or growth. They were executing a mission. You were targeted for specific reasons that had nothing to do with who you were as a person, and everything to do with what you represented, what you possessed, what destroying you would achieve for their larger agenda. Maybe you had influence they wanted to steal, connections they wanted to access, resources they wanted to control, or simply light they wanted to extinguish because it exposed their darkness. Whatever it was, you possessed something that threatened their carefully constructed reality, and rather than earn it, develop it, or create it themselves, they decided to take it from you through systematic destruction. You were competition that needed to be eliminated, an obstacle that needed to be removed, a resource that needed to be captured and contained. The relationship was never real. The connection was never genuine. The emotions they displayed were performances designed to achieve specific outcomes. While you were falling in love, making friends, building trust, they were executing a business plan where you were the target acquisition. Every moment of intimacy was data collection. Every vulnerable share was intelligence gathering. Every sign of trust was a successfully breached defense that brought them closer to their ultimate objective. They had exit strategies planned before they even entered your life, knowing exactly how they'd dispose of you once they'd extracted maximum value. The discard that felt so sudden and cruel to you was scheduled from the beginning. The devaluation that seemed to come out of nowhere was always part of the timeline. You were never a person to them. You were a project, a mission, a target to be acquired and neutralized. And once that was complete, you became just another casualty of their calculated approach to human interaction. The worst part isn't what they took from you. It's what they left behind. The invisible wounds that nobody else can see. The psychological scars that affect every interaction you have now. They didn't just hurt you. They rewired your nervous system to expect danger and safety, to question genuine kindness, to see potential threats in every new connection. They'd programmed you to doubt yourself, to apologize for existing, to shrink yourself to avoid triggering the punishment patterns they installed in your psyche. You find yourself explaining your basic needs like you're asking for something unreasonable, defending your boundaries like they're attacks on others, questioning whether your emotional responses are valid or manufactured. That's their legacy living in your nervous system, making you police yourself more harshly than they ever did, making you continue their abuse long after they're gone. They turned you into your own worst enemy, programmed to perpetuate the patterns they established, even in their absence. The hypervigilance you developed, the constant scanning for threats, the inability to fully relax, even in supposedly safe spaces. That's not paranoia. That's adaptation to prolonged psychological warfare. Your body learned to stay in fight or flight because danger was constant and unpredictable. Your mind learned to analyze every interaction for hidden agendas because that's what kept you alive in their manufactured chaos. These aren't symptoms of weakness. They're evidence of survival. But they're also chains that keep you connected to trauma long after the traumatizer has gone. Recovery isn't just about healing from what happened, it's about deprogramming from what they installed, dismantling the control mechanisms they built into your psyche, reclaiming the parts of yourself they convinced you were broken or wrong. It's about recognizing that the voice in your head telling you you're too much, too difficult, too damaged, that's not your voice. It's theirs. And it's still doing their work, even though they're no longer around to benefit from it. Once you understand what they did to you, you start seeing it everywhere, recognizing the same patterns in other people's stories, identifying the same tactics in different situations. You realize you weren't the only target. That this is happening to people all around you every single day. And most of them don't even know they're under attack. The patterns are so consistent, it's almost like they're all reading from the same playbook, following the same strategic manual, executing the same psychological operations with minor variations based on their specific targets. The love bombing phase that felt so intense and special was actually a standardized approach they use on everyone. The devaluation that felt so personal was actually a systematic process they apply to all their targets. The discard that felt so cruel and unique to your situation was actually the predictable conclusion of a cycle they repeat endlessly with different victims. Understanding this doesn't diminish your experience, but it does help you realize that it was never about you personally. You were simply occupying the target role in their perpetual pattern. You start recognizing the red flags you missed before, the subtle boundary violations that seemed like accidents, the small tests of your compliance, the gradual escalation of control disguised as care. You see how they interviewed you for the victim role without you knowing you were auditioning, how they assessed your vulnerabilities while pretending to admire your strengths, how they identified your previous traumas and positioned themselves as the healing you'd been waiting for, only to become the worst wound you'd ever carry. The knowledge you've gained through this experience has made you dangerous to them and others like them, because now you can see through the masks, recognize the tactics, identify the patterns before they can fully execute their plans. You've become a walking warning system, capable of alerting others to the danger, helping potential victims recognize what's happening before it's too late. This is why they work so hard to discredit survivors, because people who've seen behind the curtain are threats to the entire performance.